Something strange is going on as we have multiple updates surrounding the Toronto Maple Leafs and their next move as Elliot Friedman has dropped a very interesting report surrounding one particular player that has huge implications going forward for the Leafs. But something strange is going on beyond just these reports. I'm going to break that down and discuss what this means going forward, as well as a few other things. But before we get into it, if you're part of the 70% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. You guys are an absolute piece of the support, so thank you guys for that. There's a lot to go over today, and obviously, the Leafs are in an interesting spot right now. Friedman came out this week and said that the Leafs are still active and involved in a lot of conversations for a lot of different players, and all signs continue to point to the Leafs not being done. That's what everybody is saying, but something interesting is going on surrounding one player. Let's dive right into it, and that is Jack Roslovic. And you see here from Elliot Friedman, another player we talked about for Toronto was Jack Roslovic. There's still a few teams looking at him. I've heard 5 or 6 teams, and we know with Toronto, they're trying to move money around. So it seems that the Leafs are very involved with Jack Roslovic, but of course, everything is being held up by the fact that they haven't been able to move Järnkrok or David Kampf yet. But something interesting is going on here because he also hasn't, signed elsewhere, which you would assume there'd be a handful of suitors at the very least for him, especially because he's a free agent and wouldn't require assets. So I think something interesting is going on here. Maybe there's some sort of verbal agreement with the Leafs beyond just, obviously, or until, rather, they make a move clearing some of the salary.
Yeah, I think something strange is going on here because why hasn't this player signed yet? I feel like a lot of teams want him. That's evident here from Elliot Friedman that 5 or 6 teams are in the mix, but he hasn't signed yet. And it's very clear what he wants, right? Like his agents kind of floated that out there. It's been in the media that he wants north of $3 million. Now, he doesn't want anything crazy like, 6 million, 8 million, something like that, but he wants more than $3 million. So we have all that information available to us, but yet he hasn't signed yet. And we know that the Leafs literally right now as it stands can't sign him. They don't have the salary cap space to do this. So I do wonder if there is some type of verbal, like you said, a handshake agreement, whatever you want to call it, that maybe he will be a Toronto Maple Leaf once they free up the salary cap space for it. Because the other thing I heard around the league is, again, 5 teams, 6 teams are interested in him, but I also heard that the Vancouver Canucks are interested in him and that they actually want him to play second line center for them. And that's a great opportunity for a guy like Jack Roslovic to put up a ton of points and play that position, but he hasn't signed it there or anywhere else yet. And I think that's weird. This is now going into the second week of August at this point, heading into next week, and he hasn't signed yet. So I think it's weird. I do wonder if there is something there with the Toronto Maple Leafs. But to me, if you free up some salary cap space with a Calle Järnkrok and David Kampf, we're going to have another video on that tomorrow as well. If you free that up and you use it to sign a Jack Roslovic, is Jack Roslovic the answer in the top 6? I think that he might be able to put up a lot of points there, but again, had a career year last year. We'll get into his stats in a little bit, but is he the answer in the top 6? Because if you're signing Jack Roslovic now, that's it. That's probably your last move at this point. So it's either Roslovic or you're going out and you're making a trade. So I think something weird is going on here. I think it's very, very weird that he hasn't signed yet because there's a lot of teams that are interested in him. But there's a lot of rumors still there from Elliot Friedman that he has been linked to the Leafs and he hasn't signed yet.
Yeah, now maybe the Leafs are, we know they're looking for a trade in the top 6. If they don't get a trade in the top 6, Jack Roslovic would be an interesting consolation prize in the top 6 as a signing. Projected to get $4.2 million, according to, of course, this here Puckpedia. It's interesting. He wants a 2 to 3 year deal at $3 million per. So he's going to be taking less in theory, than his projected amount, but it'd be over 2 to 3 years. I don't know if the Leafs want to give someone like this 2 to 3 years, but at the same time, it lines up pretty well with. It's not like he's old. He's only 28 years old. Lines up pretty well with where they're looking at 39 points in 81 games. The question would be, how much better is he than Nick Robertson? Now, I think he is a better player than Nick Robertson. He showed that throughout his career, but I'm sure some people will argue that. You can see here, he's the best player remaining, and obviously he hasn't found anything he 100% likes, but there's definitely a few teams poking around. I've heard 5 or 6. We know the Canucks. We know now the Leafs. It's interesting because, again, you look at the team and you look at how things are shaping up. If they're unable to acquire via trade a guy like, I always just throw Troy Terry out there because I think that's the type of player, a high point player. If they're unable to acquire someone like that, I don't hate replacing Jack Roslovic with someone in the top 6. If someone would have to go, would that be a guy like Max Domi? Would that be someone else, of course, like Calle Järnkrok and David Kampf? You move off their salary and then obviously you're able to sign them. That's the big thing here, but I think he's basically their consolation prize if they're unable to get a guy like a big name in the top 6. And it's interesting, decent advanced analytics, especially offensively. I think he could flourish with the in the top 6 of the Leafs, but I don't know if he'd flourish enough to put this team over the top, especially after losing out on Mitch Marner.
Yeah, and I think like a 2 to 3 year contract, like you saw there in terms of the projection, wouldn't be so bad because the salary cap is going up. That could make some sense. And he's also not that old. And the other thing, at least stylistically and how he fits into the team, he's played with Austin Matthews before and has played well with Austin Matthews before. So I could see that making sense, him on the right wing on that top line. I could see it making sense. I just don't know if it actually does make sense. And maybe they should, use their assets, go out and make a trade. But like you said, if it does come down to it where there's if they're looking across the league and they're like, man, we really don't want to make a trade with Pittsburgh. We do not want to trade with Kyle Dubas. The price is too high. We literally don't have the assets for it. Maybe that's the plan. You sign Jack Roslovic. And again, if he's playing, because he had a pretty decent season last year and he's played in some sheltered roles, different teams and whatnot. And he's been a hot commodity at the trade deadline a couple of years in a row and has played well. But again, in these sheltered roles, if he is given an opportunity where he can play with Austin Matthews on a top line, just by default, he is going to put up more points. So, and I don't know if point production is really the biggest thing here. You have a guy on your team that, when healthy, can score 70 goals in a year or close to 70 goals in a year. So I don't know if that's necessarily a huge thing here. Tavares scored almost 40 goals last year. Nylander scored almost 50 goals last year. You can score goals still. These guys are still in the lineup, and I think you're going to get more scoring from your bottom six as well heading into next year. So stylistically, I think is the biggest thing. How does this team fit? And Jack Roslovic, if he comes in, I think that it could be a fit. And again, he's played with Matthews before, so I wouldn't hate it. I just don't know if that's the best answer, if that is the answer in the top six. So I think things are going to get very interesting. Don't count out Roslovic to Toronto yet. I think it's weird that, again, he has not signed yet. There's so many teams that have interest. There's teams like the Canucks that are offering him a bigger role and want to give him all the money that he wants, that he's been asking for. So I think things are going to get interesting. And I do wonder if he hasn't signed yet because he wants to sign with the Leafs and they can't yet.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned they played with Austin Matthews. For those confused, it was with the United States development team, so not with the Leafs earlier on in their career. We obviously know started off and was pretty good for a while there with Winnipeg before getting shipped off part of that line A trade. But it's going to be interesting there, and you can see here, after matching his career high with 22 goals last season, he remains unsigned. It is weird. The market has been, to be fair, weird this offseason as well. A lot of guys didn't sign, and they signed a lot, and now it's quiet down a little bit. $1.9 million cap space. They don't have enough for Roslovic right now. They have to make another move, and a subsequent move will happen before you do that. But then I also could see a world where, can moves continue to happen after. I don't think Brad Treliving is done, obviously. Like, they could, trade whoever else, Calle Yarncrook will say, sign Jack Roslovic. And in theory, if they really work things out, they could still make a trade, getting rid of Max Domi and trying to acquire someone else. Like, they don't have to be done, but I think ultimately they have one more move up their sleeve minimum, and I don't know. It's the fact he hasn't signed yet makes things a little bit more intriguing. Quickly as well, before we wrap up here, here's a quick look at his stats for those who are curious. And again, he averaged about 13 minutes of ice time. He's only 28 years old. Will be still 28 when the season starts, but or maybe approaching 29, about to be 29. Solid numbers overall here. And one other thing before I wrap up, Darius, is about Kyle Clifford. It's very interesting. Want to throw a shout out to him. He's officially called it a career on his hockey playing days. He spent 5 out of the last 6 years in the Leafs organization. Obviously, a ton of accolades. So he's actually moving on to a developmental role with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're starting to see a little bit more across not only the NHL but leagues now. Players who used to play, whether it be in the minors or the majors, or for baseball and basketball, obviously now the NHL as well. Of course, we've seen that across the time. Kyle Clifford moving into a different role and is officially retired.
Yeah, he has retired and, had a great career, won the Stanley Cup, obviously spent some time with the Leafs, most recently with the Marlies. Now he's taking on a development role with the organization. He's working very closely with Jake Muzzin. He's been at OHL games, doing some scouting, looking at not just scouting for the future, but looking at guys that they've already drafted that are in the system, like a Ben Danford, for example. So he's been doing a lot of that stuff. So pretty cool. And I like the fact that the Leafs are retaining the services of certain players like a Jake Muzzin, like a Kyle Clifford, and then they move into a developmental role with the squad. So pretty good. And congratulations on a great career and officially retiring.
Yeah, let's know what your thoughts are on that. And of course, what your thoughts are on Jack Roslovic, and if you want to see him as a Leaf. You guys have been fantastic. Things are going to start to pick up soon. We'll keep you up to date every step of the way. See you guys later.